yes, I would. I love this visual representation and the genealogy that brings us back to why we're here. And when we were established as a department, first as a program, an experimental program in 1970 at UH Mānoa, not only did you not have this list, you didn't have any Hawaiian studies being taught. In fact, it was our department that taught the first course, which was the Hawaiians, and Daviana McGregor, at the time a graduate student, involved in the development, and her book too that's come out would be a good candidate for this genealogy, the Nakua Aina, which came out in 2007. She'll be on later this afternoon in the Aloha Aina debate, which again connecting with the points that Noinoi raised on Aloha Aina. We have a new way of engaging our indigenous Kanaka-Uiwi in the development of knowledge, and it's done through the relationships that, as both Jeff and Taiaiake pointed out, are those of alliance, those of nurturing and feeding the right things so that the right kinds of things come back that are brought to the fore in the ways that our lands, our waters can recognize us again, and getting our bearings from indigenous spaces and indigenous spatiality, as Vince pointed to, is key to that. And from now on, I will always refer to the Vikings as the Polynesians of the Atlantic. So thanks for that. I want to now open this time up for questions from the audience or comments. We do have a mic right there, a standing mic, which once you can kind of gather your thoughts and think of a question, we invite you to approach and please ask. Oh, and please introduce yourself.
Hello, my kako, Cody Fermantes. I teach Hawaiian Pacific Studies at BYU Hawaii. And it seems to be, well, first of all, Ty, like I always like to joke with you can interpret this how you want. You the man, right? Or remade, maybe. So looking at this panel, I think maybe we're looking at some of the star compasses, yeah? And I do want to compliment you, but also maybe challenge you a little bit. I would, looking at, I love your wordplay, of course, as always been, the subjugation of indigenous spatiality by the cardinal directionality and the adjudication of knowledge, right? Something like that. Yeah. As a cultural geographer, I can appreciate that. And I like the alliteration in my own work. I've used this, like, from the 80s being this, the native people being displaced, dispossessed, etc. I like the idea, Jeff, of the Aina or the land and sea recognizing you. And then of course, Noinoi, I love this genealogy. This is great to see. But I think that's still kind of old school. That is to say, if we're looking at our future, our way, who is the our? And I'm thinking as an educator, as a teacher, I'm pretty old in my pedagogy, my approach. So I'd be curious what you think, from a student's perspective, what the future looks like.
I don't know. A few years ago, I was asked to end note the Center for Pacific Island Studies, was that a 50th commemoration? But I had one of those magic balls. You asked a question, and maybe, right? I don't have it now. But I think it's a really good question. I like thinking about that idea of the land and the ocean recognizing you, and how that forces us to rethink compass and bearings. But we can also think about the next generation, and younger folks as that as well, right? And the challenges that that puts. Especially when we recognize the generation of the diaspora, generations that are not steeped, however decultured our generation might be, that they will be also embedded in other cultures, and the challenges that poses for how to define subjectivity in culture. I think it behooves us to still try to keep it a little flexible. Yeah.
For our part, we have a number of our doctoral students here. I'm not going to call them out to answer that question, but I think I can give a general sense of the work that's being done in our program as an indication of what the future looks like. You know, in terms of what our doctoral students are, just reflecting on that for the first time really as a trend. It seems like the whole focus on theoretical constructions of the state and sovereignty, and countering that with counter-theoretical constructions of indigenous sovereignty and statehood and all that is something that is, as you say, old school. Most of the work being done by our doctoral students and even our master's students is not really focused on that as a form of decolonization. If I can characterize it in one way, it's more a focus on the practical achievement of decolonizing effects in communities. So the shift from kind of theorizing it and trying to understand it to actually feeling it and achieving it in real ways in people's lives is something that's very much a trend among the students that we do. And if that's going to define the future of what Indigenous governance is and Indigenous studies, and I think that's a really good thing because it moves us closer towards the achievement of a part of actually resurgence theory as we put it together, and we'll be talking about next week in much more detail, which is that Indigenous sovereignty, Indigenous nation is really the culmination and the summation of all of the acts, the everyday acts, the small things and the big things, but all of the things that we do to recover ourselves as Indigenous people. And it's not focused on grand theories and ideas so much as those things. And I think if there's anything that identifies a trend in the work of all of our students, that's it.
I don't know the answer to that one either. But yeah, I think, along those lines, it's always started as a challenge for us, to our students, and to other folks that we work with, to say, reinterpret these things. And so I think there's that commitment to reinterpreting what's gone before and make it your own, right? Think of that in our teachings as well. And so, yeah, I see a lot of the work emerging now from Indigenous scholars that are, I'm happy to say the language is first and foremost in the minds of them and in the work. So the Indigenous languages are coming out more and more prominently in the scholarship as well, focus on gender, right? And so some of the work that some of our master's and PhD students are doing is decolonizing this notion of gender, but also in gendered relationships, but also even building on the Vika's work on decolonizing Indigenous masculinities.
Paula, for the question, and like my colleagues here, since I'm not a student, I can't really answer from a student's perspective, but I can say that there's very exciting work that's being done by students. So with this, in inverting that genealogy chart, you can see how each generation builds on the next. So the next generation is our students, right, who are doing and taking these things in other directions. So one of the things I think that's really exciting is that there's actually academic work being produced in Hawaiian. So it's not huge yet, but there's some dissertations written in Hawaiian, and now we have the ability, we have enough people to have a full committee of people that can actually read a whole dissertation that's written in Hawaiian. There's been several articles in academic journals that are written in Hawaiian without a translation. So that, I think, is one of the really forward-looking things. And then, and I'm supervising my second doctorate in writing a dissertation in Hawaiian now. So there's lots of other directions, and I guess I would just say that our job is to, as Ty said, you know, put our students in the position to do the work, right? And like anything else, we have brilliant people coming into our programs, and we give them some stuff to work with, and then they build something that we don't expect. And it's wonderful to see the next generation, the next generation. I feel like a great grandmother already.
I wanted to add something else when Kali, your question maybe, for whatever reason, look to a much younger generation, but when I think about students I've worked with, the best example I think is Lonnie Tevis's work that is looking at what she's calling defiant indigeneity, that is explicitly refusing the terms of what nativeness looks like. Right? So that's going to really mess things up a lot, but it's no less Kanakamo'u, right? So that's exciting work to me. That's where you're looking at punk, you're looking at hip hop, other forms that we don't normally take to be indigenous. But this is not lost souls. This is not people who don't know who they are. They're responding to, like Jeff mentioned, you know, the limits of recognition and the limits of reconciliation, which at an age, at a time when the resurgence is also being continually being co-opted and commodified, it calls for other pragmatics of heading those kinds of processes off as well. It will necessarily require different ways of defining indigeneity.
Mahalo. This brings to a conclusion our first panel. Please join me in thanking Vince, Candy, Jeff, and Megan.